things.
Oh, you guys.
Starting. Look at that. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cepheus Protocol podcast. On today's episode, in the news today, we'll be covering the continued implementation of multiplayer systems and some of the challenges that the teams face there. General development updates around the upcoming Alcatraz island. We've got some fun stuff to show off there. And just some more general system rebuild. And lastly, some talk around the progress going on operators, as well as just some general other topics as we fill the time. I think we're starting with the progress on multiplayer. And our first kickoff topic is unit sharing.
So let me go ahead and I will share my screen and we can jump right into it. So I'm going to switch to, hold on. So one of the key things that we want to do this time around with the project rebuild to encourage basically to build into the framework basically how we're going about unit ownership and making sure that the code from the get-go this time around supports replication, otherwise known as co-op, multiplayer play. So then that way you guys can all kind of work and collaborate together. So as we've been certifying and essentially converting systems over and modernizing to newer standards, we've also been just kind of like implementing things that we wanted to do when it came to the co-op. So here's the first example that I'm going to show. Let's do that. And we're going to put it on 2 players. And let me drag that viewport over. We're going to do half and half. And you're going to see your basic circ right here. Now, the first thing I'm going to show is that basically the idea is that you have open and you have ownership mode. Open is meant for like a close-knit group of friends that trust each other in terms of understanding how everyone's playing. You know, like you're not going to get any trolls. You're not going to get anyone to basically not understand how to play the game and get all your favorite toys killed. So that was the idea behind open mode, which is the default when a host starts the game. And then you have ownership mode. And ownership was based off of the concept of kind of like how Total War works, where you can gift a player a unit, and then essentially they're the only one that can control that unit, and the host can't. And you'll see that when you gift it, if I had the unit selected previously, their highlight changes to a different color. And that essentially makes it to where the player gets that visual feedback. Oh, I can't control said unit in the co-op game, and I need to either talk to the person that owns said unit to get control if I know how to do something better than that person, or have the host reset the global settings so that everyone can control the unit. Because then you'll see both of them change to the blue color, and now everyone can issue orders and condescend each other's orders by just like the second player, third player, fourth player can jump in on open and just issue different orders without saying like, hey, like an order doesn't have to finish in the confines of a co-op to basically allow someone else to jump in, intercede it, and do something else if they're just watching your units more closely than someone that's at home building a base. So that was one of the things that we pushed right there was the unit ownership. You'll also see that we moved where the command window was over here. We added more buttons. We didn't talk about that as much as I'd like last week. And then we added this details panel. And let me see if I can bring it up. So we are working on this details panel with our concept artists. And we're hoping to get it ironed out going into Monday, Tuesday, because I have some more changes and revisions to do. But the idea is that we want to make sure that it gives in a quick glance all of the critical information that you need for the game. So then that way you can make really quick actions. And because let's say someone else built another unit or you built a unit and you didn't fully read the description, you at least don't have to go back to a barracks or something else of the kin, like a mortar pool, to know what your unit specifications are and what they're good against and what they're bad against. Because weapons ultimately determine what you're good and bad against in this game. Like, yeah, you have the health, it's a little bit slightly, like, slower, health a little higher or lower. But ultimately, the weapons have damage resistances and built into them that allow them to counter a juggernaut more effectively over another enemy type. So one of the last things that I'm trying to work out is keeping those two little bar graphs at the bottom right. And then at the same time, obviously we're not going to have the white color for like the weapon hologram. We're going to have like the actual real weapon textures that we have, like the ones in the current barracks. Like we're not going back to that white design. That's just the artist just did that really quickly as a mock-up. And then the next thing is basically having it to where you can highlight the weapon, or having somewhere where you can highlight it and see like what it's good against and what it's bad against. So you would know, yeah, that's the damage fall off, that's the magazine capacity, and that's how fast the weapon fires, which is good information to have. But the last piece of information that you guys haven't had for years and we've had from a back end standpoint is what the M4 is good for versus the SCAR. In terms of damage boost, and they get higher damage drop off values, and they get boosters and modifiers when you shoot certain enemies with certain weapons. So this time around, when we're trying to build this game for this finite state of like leaving Q1 and coming out stronger when we came in, is essentially making sure that we accommodate and kind of resolve these long-standing like player feedback, player communication aspects of gameplay, so they understand what's going on and they can make meaningful decisions in the moment and not have to guess or be like, oh, I think the SCAR is better against the Juggernaut, kind of stuff, which is bad game design. If someone has to sit there and do a card game to figure out what's good and what's bad, and we need to fix that. So that's one of the things that I've made as part of my initiative, of the part that we're at least going to do with the UI. There's going to be, like, for instance, this new details panel is going to be how you condemn and you clear out structures. It's not going to be that ugly little box that when you click on so this is how you view bridge health. This is how you look at an enemy, like an infected enemy. You can select them and you'll see details about them, their melee damage, what kind of weapons they have, what they're good and what they're bad against. So this is like our way of kind of bringing things back into the fold of what a standard RTS that you're expected to have when you select another unit, and being able to see like what are they bringing to the table, whether it be an adversary, a neutral, like a civilian, or yourself, your own units. So these kind of go together because I was showing it off and I didn't want to backtrack Winter. So I figured I'd just take the moment to just talk about it right now. Was there anything else you two wanted me to hit upon for this topic? Questions?
Specifically on unit sharing.
I have one funny story though.
But I did have a
not
question.
Really funny story. Not really that funny. It's funny. It's funny story. Where essentially it's one of those things where it's like it's funny when you go in and you actually implement some of these systems, and with like the Unreal Engine not being really known for like a lot of multiplayer RTS games, is ownership and like delegation of like custody was a pain in the ass because like you figured I think the first couple of days of setting up the abort move and setting up the ownership was figuring out chain of custody and figuring out the order of operations that you have to execute commands in to get the engine to comply with what you're trying to do within the confines of the box of how they do or the authoritative model inside of Unreal Engine to stop cheating and whatnot. So the idea is like you have to send a lot of calls to the RPC, but certain actors can't send those calls, so you have to use a redirector or a proxy actor like the player controller, which has chain of custody to make said requests. So I know that kicked our ass over the last couple of days. Like, we're basically like we did the abort move and we did the ownership mode as a exercise in terms of figuring out the order of operations and how to do it in the least amount of code, make it simple, make it easy to maintain, and then be able to scale it up for patrol move, for attack move, for overloading. So the good thing is we got it all figured out this week, and we'll talk a little bit more about the abort later on because that's on the list, I know. And it was just basically like, that's why you'll see like there's only a halt, and there's only the details panel, and there's only the ownership mode, because like now we're going to take what we learned from the ownership mode and the cache that Derek did, because last night Derek implemented a currency system, and we could talk about that later if you want, Winter, because he just finished that before he went to sleep a couple hours ago. So we'll get into that later in the conversation. Anyhow, back to you, because now I'm just going off.
You're just going off.
I talk and talk.
We love it when you go off. It's funny.
It's good. It fills the time. Otherwise, Durnavir and I end up staring at each other awkwardly. Intimately.
Stare at each other lovingly in each other's eyes.
I had a question pop up, and this was actually good because you mentioned this. Someone was asking about playable infected, which is a long way off, but you were talking last night about how with the currency system and the faction wrapper that will allow for that in the future.
One of the key things this time around is we were going to take systems like the blow up ability or like the spit ability and turn that in so that it worked within the confines of the ability system that we have made for Cirque. So then that way it's easier and more plug and play for the capability of having it to work later down the road. I'm not giving a timeline or an estimate. We could essentially make the infected playable, because that's a big design goal, is having it to where you could be on both sides of the coin, and you can essentially like play all co-op on infected or play all co-op on Cirque is the idea. Now, I don't think we're going to be able to support versus for quite a while because the technical hurdles we have to jump over in terms of performance and optimization. It's possible, but I have no idea for that. It's not a priority at this time. Our game is primarily the PvE, PvP co-op experience, and that's enough. And when it comes down to it, it was basically like the currency system that we talked about last night. Is we wrote it in a way where it was more abstract, based off of looking at like how other people have done it in the industry, off of GDC talks and everything, where it's easier to introduce new currencies to the game. Like, give you a couple examples. The dynamic civilian groups use currency as a supply. Cirque uses cash and DNA. But it would allow us the flexibility to introduce other sub-currencies, or modders could introduce sub-currencies to have it to where food, water, X, Y, and Z for the infected, biomass, and population. So that way the biomass could be basically like unique strains or mutations that allow you to basically make the Juggernaut to the blow-up guy. So we're planning from the get-go of this currency system, that we're going to expand and develop further as we keep doing this in this Q1 stage. It'll be left on the wayside when it's done and ready for the civilians and for the Cirque. And then it'll be there and it'll be ready, ideally, for when we get to the point of like, okay, we have enough resources, we have enough time, let's invest that into basically, getting this playable for the infected standpoint. And at the same time, on the coin flip of that aspect, there was an initiative that me and Derek were talking about going into February, March, when we do pandemic mode, we're going to be doing that distinctly different because you figure one thing that I've heard people talk about is having it to where like, okay, when we get to the point of playing as the infected long term, or just generally maybe having like an AI that can manage Cirque long term, that can help you delegate tasks like in Stellaris, is having it to where we write a wrapper. We have a class that gets spawned in every time you play the game. It's called a faction manager. And our thought process with that is to put the AI director for each faction that operates within the confines of their initiatives, what their goal is in gameplay, and we write a central level function, or a class above that, that basically allows us to define the rules and regulations of how do you go about expanding, how do you go about building up your zone, how do you handle diplomacy. And we were going to be rewriting that whole system when we came to pandemic mode and writing it in a way intelligently to where we could trickle that down to Cirque in the future for what we talked about for playing as the infected. Again, no timeline. I'm just mentioning it as like a long-term goal after early access's release, is to basically like, hey, we have this framework that we can better build from, and we were going to build the infected on this new framework. We'll go back and we'll tweak the parent class as things change and are altered to make the flow there the same way we did the health component, where we wrote a health component that was the child of all characters in the world, whether it be vehicles, structures, and people, organics, instead of writing a very unwieldy interfaces and having to rewrite, re-replicate, and recopy and paste dozens of codes, because a lot of things of how people die are the same across the board when it comes to like, yeah, there are some distinctions here and there, but there was enough to where we could put the high level code in shared classes and then be able to replicate that and then do overrides for like the uniqueness of like the helicopter spinning out kind of stuff when we get to that point in a couple weeks. So that was a huge push with this week to basically make sure that we're planning for the future and we're using all the things we've learned over the course of the game's development and being mindful of what's going to come down the pipe that myself and Chris have talked about. Michael, other developers on the team, Durvar and Winter, you guys are no shy of like bringing in your ideas when we're in the closed rooms on the development Discord. And we'll talk about stuff of like, hey, that's a good idea. We can't do it now, but let's at least start to arrange the table long term. So those are things that we can consider to implement as resources are freed up from us leaving early access and having all the stuff on the roadmap done and having the campaign done. Because then it opens us up to explore other avenues that are been relegated to like, we have no idea, and these are wish list features. But yeah, back to you two.
I was just reorganizing our schedule a bit because I realized.
No, you're fine. Okay, just roll with the punches. Let's go.
Well,
What's next?
I put one section in the wrong area, but
there's quite a few on today. We got like 20 on Steam, we got 24 on Discord, and we have 10 on YouTube. Great to see you guys all here and spend the time with us this week.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. Welcome everyone. Welcome.
Of course.
I'm just stalling for you, bro.
It's good. It's good.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh my god!
Hi.
My dog's over here nagging me to throw the ball. Let me just throw it down the hallway so she leaves me alone.
Because you went over movement orders.
I can go into.
Okay, that's why I was like, I was just moving things around a bit. It's all good.
So like my sort of thing about the unit sharing is I personally I've loved that sort of module of sort of sharing units among other players, because it allows different versatilities of strategies, different sort of
and that was the biggest thought process there. Yeah, because like you figure it came down to like some people in every RTS game have a nuance or have a better understanding of units and how to best get the most out of them. And it was one of those things where it was like, okay, like we need to drill into that, because it's something that a lot of other shared co-op games don't have, where you can't really like take away control. Like if someone's like not abusing it or like, basically not doing the best, you can basically take away their units, give them some units. And one of the things we're going to be showing going into Monday is the same thing for money, where like we have the base system of money replicated now and other players can see it, but we were going to go another step further than that going on to Monday, Tuesday. And it's one of the last things of the core elements of Cepheus before we move on to the other Cirque units and adding in the other stuff on the details panel, is having it to where you could delegate an even distribution split of anything coming in. So the idea is like, let's say, for instance, somebody use as an example, Terrifier. Remember when you used to bankrupt us in Park Attack, where you'd build like the really big fucking roller coaster, and then me and Michael will be in the corner, and we're like, what the happened to all of our money? And you're like, man, this is the best roller coaster ever. Shut up.
And it would be this massive thing that would get
And the ride would take like 10 to 20 minutes, so that we had no money overture. And it was one of those things where this is where the idea actually came from playing with Durabar. Was basically, we love you, Durabar. Where basically the idea is like to have it to where you could divvy up the money from even distribution or open. Where the idea was everything goes into one coffer and everyone can share it equally. And then the other idea was having it to where the moment you turn it on, the host has to divvy out money, or the players have to wait until they get enough money allocation in to basically start doing whatever they're trying to do. And players can send money to each other. Via the same way we're going to have the control system, we're working on this next, to basically have it to where like, okay, like player 1 can send player 3, 1,000, 400, or the host could be like, you know what? You guys keep spending all my money. No one's actually thinking about how we're going to play this game. They lock it down, and then they just send out 5,000, 5,000, 5,000. And then you figure, then they're like, okay, like now you get to wait like maybe 5 or 10 minutes until you get enough allocation in from like the ticks of the money for everyone, if it's on even distribution still at that point. But that was the idea there, where it was just kind of like, okay, like that way it plans for the future in terms of like the trolls that might join your lobby, and just steal all your money or fuck it up and then leave. And yeah, it's kind of going that route. But anyhow, back to you two.
You never want me joining your lobby then.
All right. Again, that's good. That's excellent. Brought us back. We're back on time. I think now is the time for about 10 minutes of just general questions about multiplayer. Specifically, if anyone has any questions about how the multiplayer is going to work. We've got a Q&A section on general development coming up, and then on operators after that. So keep your questions to multiplayer specifically for now. Anything about how it'll work?
Yeah.
Here we go. I think I can answer this one. Literally 1984 asks, how do co-op players lose, if possible? If I'm not mistaken, please correct me. It's just the same as single player. If the carrier gets destroyed, all players will lose. And
we were talking about that actually recently, because me and Efren and Michael, I don't think I've keyed in Chris a couple times on this conversation, is essentially having it to where you could, because one of the things we did with the carrier is we kind of boxed ourselves into a hole for only having water-based maps. So something we were talking about long term for like doing like an inland city in the future was having it to where there's like a truck or some kind of deployable one that's really early access, so we could have more variation in maps instead of just everything always having to be on the water. So just keep in mind we are thinking about that long term. We experimented with that on the old Calypso, but there was no real loss condition because you couldn't even get to there was a military base that the helicopters would run the evacuation to that was outside of the valley that you were playing on the old legacy Calypso, and it just didn't really work. It was the contest with the winter change of like now you couldn't even lose on Calypso with that change. So it's one of those things where like we need to go in the same vein of essentially having it to where it is like some kind of mobile object that you can deploy and pack up, but it will obviously have its pros and cons against the carrier. Anyhow, back to you two.
A next question here from Air Tankier, which we've all been having a laugh about. Will there be friendly fire between?
Right now there is. I mean, it'll come down to playtesting and figuring out what people want.
I assume there'll be an option perhaps
operators
later on. Until then, it's Helldivers.
Operators can friendly fire each other. Airstrikes can friendly fire. But like, you figure it's one of those things where like we haven't really like put really attention to detail into that. If you see me like friendly firing the operator, it's just because it's just for the laws. I mean, you figure it's gonna come down to basically what people want, because again, it's easy to do. It's just, I imagine people were going to want on and off, and we'll leave it off by default, maybe. I don't know. And then that way people can turn it on, people that want that more hardcore experience. But I'm open to that one in terms of what the community wants us to go for.
Yeah.
I can see in a
There you go.
multiplayer session. I can see in a multiplayer session if Robin and I ever play together.
You're gonna firebomb me.
I can definitely.
I'm not even going to like.
firebomb
I
you.
don't have any delusions of this. You're just gonna firebomb me. Oh, I'm so sorry. We play Helldivers.
I'm so sorry. It was an act. Yeah, I blew you off so many times. I'm sorry. It was an accident, was it? No, not really.
Jonesy asks, will each player be able to pick a different doctrine?
That's not animated in the game anymore. It's freeform. So the idea would be like we've had it this way for a while. Is you can choose anything. You can do any combination. So we wanted to go down that same trek of like each player has a shared doctrines tree. So as one thing is unlocked, everyone gains it. We didn't want to isolate it. So each player that joins is down their own progression track. Because you're in the host's shared world environment feel. So once the host unlocks something, let's say you join in an hour later, you have that unlocked. So now you can bring your knowledge to the table and play. And that was the way we wanted to push it. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no. So yeah, that's Cirque acts as a single
Stellaris
faction
is
with
the closest
players
example I can find, or
controlling
Halo Wars.
rather than
There's a question on YouTube. Let me take that one real fast. Rich Vial question: will the number of infected scale with player count? If not, how do you guys handling the balance? So when it comes to the balance, we're going off the idea of 120 to start with, and then we're going to benchmark and test to see how much more we can push that. We'll try and push it closer to 200, but it's going to come down to there are limitations from the network to the computer architecture of how far we can push numbers. Infected right now are around 200 to 300 at any given time. Circus around 120, 200 if you use custom game settings. And it's going to come down to playtesting. Because one of the biggest reasons why we didn't just go batshit crazy and just double all the infected population counts and triple it was because we knew we were going to get to a point where we're going to have to send that data, that movement data, over the internet. And doing that is going to require NASA internet in terms of the amount of updates and rep calls you'd have to do that come with it. So it was one of those things where like, okay, we can do the current numbers we have. We need to test that. So over the here, I'll show you guys. So let me bring up that map. We have, where is it? Co-op test map. And let me share my screen. And this map is currently the test that Dimitri is going to be authoring and cleaning up going into next week. And this is going to be our first developer field test where all the players spawn in that center area and they defend it against an infinite amount of infected that are coming in. And that's where we're going to be testing what you're talking about and making sure that everything's performant and all the systems are working correctly. And then once we do that, we're going to phase up and scale up to the next level, which is bringing in the vehicles and bringing in the vehicles related doctrine upgrades, because we knew those were going to take the longest. So we decided to do the non-doctrine upgrades and the infantry stuff first, and then do the rest going into February towards the mid part. Do that, get it certified, and then move on to March-ish, which would basically be Pandemic Light Mode, which would be a new map that Dimitri will make. It'll be a cut-up of San Francisco North. And that way we can stress test all the systems in play, like world partition, like devirtualization and virtualization, so we can ensure the game keeps performant as we go layer by layer. And again, we can chunk off sections of gameplay as we're going to make sure everything's working and operating correctly. And the sooner I can get a build out to you guys, the better. Because you figure right now you can't really play much. It's more so just abstract mechanics and systems like the health component, the inventory system, and so on and so forth. And then in the next week or so, going into next Friday, we're going to basically be aiming to basically have more gameplay mechanics, and that there might be a possibility by next podcast or definitely by the end of January, ideally, is you'll have like a small little map you can spawn like this and just move units around, test the formations, and just see how things feel from a camera to a movement perspective. And then eventually we'll figure out how to get the Steam master server working for other people. For us, we're going to be joining off IP, and we're going to know who's going to be hosting. But we have to figure out the Steam master servers for when we open this up for other people to play test on experimental, possibly contact Valve to see, like, do we get a unique server for, like, experimental, or do we use the same one for Legacy Cepheus? Not really sure about that. We're going to seek out some clarification in the coming weeks. Anyhow, back to you guys.
Actually, is there anything else you wanted to show off?
I
with
mean, no,
the
it's just
test area?
literally I'm having him put in some canals and some other buildings, kind of like North-South canals from Battlefield. So we can, I want to, in this thing, there's this little microcosm, get the infected climbing working and the jump downs. Like you guys saw the jump downs on the first day. I was always showing that infected understand that they can jump off of like a clear platform. So if there's no like supporting arcs like this, they can jump down and come after you. And Michael put in some jump animations in the game now. So it was one of those things where it's like we want to freshen up gameplay and make it to where it's more dynamic and less predictable. To where it's like you take examples like this of this rooftop, where this would be a perfect example of getting it to where we remove the build restrictions on rooftops, because that was one of the big things. I don't want to go back to the old system of having build restrictions on rooftops. So we were going to use this test map to sneak in the infected climbing via nav links and replication support to basically have it to where they could run up the wall like in Left 4 Dead. I'm sure everyone here has played the original OG Left 4 Dead 1 and 2. And that was the I hate you.
I actually haven't.
But anyway, so that
I genuinely have. I've
you
never
didn't have a
experienced
teen ship.
Every one citation we did.
But yeah, so it was one of those things. That's one of the big things that we're drilling in on this time around. This map is meant to encompass all of the baseline gameplay with replication support, with the 4 players defending this plateau, and then these little brown areas right here are going to be filled in with obstacles that make sense of like pathways and roadways and canals and little random things that we can stress test the AI, and we just have the AI spawn here, 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 there, and there, and then have them all have an objective to destroy your Cirque facility in the center, your Cirque tent, and boom, that way we can playtest everything and get everything where it needs to be, and then when we're happy, y'all are happy, we move on to the next stage, which is pandemic light, civilian evacuation, ambient civilians, dynamic civilian groups, pandemic mode as a whole, and Chelsea lieutenants and the alternate start mode with the crows. I haven't forgot about that. It's going to happen. And the big thing is that we're going to take a month for pandemic in Marchish so we can do better custom game settings. I haven't forgotten about that either, because I know that we talked about this about 3 weeks ago in terms of having it to where you guys could configure health, movement speed, and turn off more enemy variations to customize the game to your whims so you can play the zombie experience you want to play. So if you want to play 28 weeks later, you can do that and just turn on only standard infected, increase their speed, increase their health, and make it to, they can only run, or make it to where they can only walk like the original OG Resident Evil 1. So that's one of the biggest things we want to do. And at that point, they only walk. You probably want to triple or quadruple their health. So then that way the game isn't turned into like super easy mode. But those are the things that we're looking at in these phases as we go through, and then notifying them and replicating them for each process, each stage that we go through. Back to you two. What?
Birds only mode? When?
Oh, that would be terrible.
That's
Birds
horrible.
only mode. Just constantly shooting at the bloody sky.
All right. I think unless we can take like maybe one more question. If anyone's
nothing on Steam.
Flying exploding people. Flying block guys. How about that?
Exploders with wings.
Exploders with wings. Spitters with wings. There you go.
Oh god.
So John Castillo asked on YouTube, will you guys recreate the game on Unreal Engine to support a better gameplay experience and eventually a better multiplayer experience? That's already what we're doing. The entire game is being the entire game has been deleted at this point, and we're rebuilding it from the source assets, and reprogramming it the entire game. Like there are a few systems that are coming over in their entirety. We're using them as like, okay, that's a prototype. That's how we would do it. But let's see if we can find better ways of doing it, more performant ways of doing it, that kind of stuff. So we're already doing that. We're doing the entire game over, and we're doing the co-op. And now that we know what people want and how they want the game to play, and just generally we know better in terms of how to optimize and space out these calls, we're writing a lot more systems to push us in that angle of like extendability of like what we talked about earlier for the currency, from the health component to the inventory component and whatnot. And because that's a very big key thing for me. Is nobody makes a game and goes into it wanting to be like poorly received, shitty, buggy, blah, blah, blah. So it's one of those things where we need to take the time to fix the core from all the stuff we've learned from the foundational stuff, which we're doing now, apply all the stuff we've learned, and then basically get it in y'all's hands so you can play test it. And we're using Rust from 2013, 2012 as the precedent of like they did it 10 years ago, and they've never been stronger in terms of like it sucked for the period that they did it in, but the game, what it was before and what it was now, is in stark difference. And I think that you can make the argument that every year that you come back to the game, it fundamentally changes from the game that released in 2020 to the game that's in 2025. I was talking to a guy in the public Discord where he was saying that like it's completely a different game than what I bought 4 years ago, and it's for the better. And I was like, okay, that's good to hear. In terms of basically like they're, you know, them noticing it, like, oh, okay, like our efforts are going noticed, and we just need to keep down this track of keep pushing and innovating and improving the game based off of your feedback and the goal and the initiative, the initiative we're going for the roadmap. No, we're not releasing any DLCs at this time until we leave early access. We might release another support pack and the potentially, but that's not really a priority. We were talking about it one time or another, but the Patreon, we're pushing more of the Patreon, the YouTube, and the Discord's pledges, and just basically giving people merch to basically like help us during slower periods, because we all work day jobs for the most part. So you figure it's one of those things where we do our 9 to 5 and then we come home and we work on the game. So that's just the reality of the situation. It is what it is. Anyhow, back to y'all.
We can this concludes the multiplayer segment for now. We'll be moving on to
very when you say
the next section is
perfect.
Alcatraz.
Efren, you ready?
We can take a look at the progress on Alcatraz and just hopefully the general development
Let me
section.
Yeah, I can hear you. Is everything committed as of the podcast start?
All right. You might want to update it a little bit. I made some changes because I took out some stuff that I had laid around.
Let me go ahead and update, and I will share my screen.
For those who may be not aware, who may not be aware is the correct way to say that sentence. Alcatraz will function as sort of the hub for the world, where you'll be able to walk around and there'll be a firing range. You can test out stuff. You can interact with people, do missions and stuff. Kind of like main menu.
It's basically like if you had Helldivers or any of those other games. Like we took the idea of Wings of Liberty for StarCraft, but like I wanted to make it to where you can interact in the world itself. The main menu is a character, kind of like you had Wings of Liberty where you had the Hyperion. Is like you figure it was cool. I loved it, but I actually wanted to walk around, talk to people, and basically get a more sense of the people and like see what goes on in the ambience. And Helldivers was brilliant for what they did for like their environment. And it was just kind of one of those things where I was like, okay, like we need to experiment with that. We need to try that out and have it to where like you kind of have this hub that you can essentially walk around in as the operator that you'd customize with this new revamp that essentially would allow you to like get a sense in the circ, their operations, and then long term be a bridge in how you're playing the game. Because one of the things that I was going to have my artists do is over there is Treasure and over there is San Francisco. So we wanted to have it to where when you load it into this map, we would asynchronously check your save files and put like explosions or little things in the background to be an echo chamber of how you've been playing the game recently. And in that way, we can kind of have like a glimpse into like, oh, like those explosions are because in that last game, everyone's dead in this city, as part of the city. And that the green zones are still over here and it's clean, it's nice, there's no fires, there's no explosions, that kind of stuff. And we wanted to kind of have that as like an echo chamber, how you're playing your game to reinforce that. I think those kind of creative decisions are really, really cool. But anyway, I'll let it over to you, Efren. I'm starting by the lighthouse.
Oh, well, I haven't done too much work around the lighthouse yet. I've started down at the docks, and I've been changing up the way I do this. As you can see, the landscape's a little funky and unreal. You get these like jagged edges that are kind of hard to smooth out, or if you want like really sharp edges as far as like sculpting on the landscape and then getting those near these retaining walls that are sort of built into the cliff sides. I kind of pivoted away from relying on landscape splines to shape the landscape and make these paths going up the hill towards the cell house So I've been replacing it with like static meshes, dialing down the landscape in those areas so it doesn't clip through some of these structures. And the biggest challenge here is mainly just incorporating, the man-made hardscapes with, the natural rock formations of Alcatraz, because you see a lot of like mix of areas where they have man-made walls, and then it just transitions to a cliffside. So finding these spots and then seeing, okay, how am I going to do this? Especially the way the, Unreal landscape acts. Like I've tried ways of upping the resolution so I don't get too many of those jagged edges. And there's just no way of doing it without making the landscape bigger than it needs to be. So that's why I transitioned over. Like right here, the ramp that you're on was one, before it was just landscape ramp. I was using a spline to make that slope. And now I've replaced that with that static mesh, and I've kind of lowered the landscape a little bit so that it doesn't poke through it. And the same with the retaining walls on some of these cliff sides. I've dialed it back, put in some static meshes so that we don't have landscape poking through. There's still some areas that need more refinement as far as that goes. And let's see, what this is I believe that's
the old guns are over there. Yeah, because the old guns are over there where they have like some kind of like old artillery gun emplacement things over there. Yeah, and then this is the officers' club that burned down. Oh no, it didn't burn down. Sorry, that's the one further down. Anyway, back to you.
And there's a lot of places to go here too. Like I pretty much modeled out the whole island or blocked it out entirely, even though we're going to have some of these areas closed off to players. In the RTS, I believe there is going to be
yes. So the idea is that basically the areas that will allow that you can basically helicopter and take your units over here and build in certain areas. So most of the exterior areas are being built where there's enough negative space so you can accommodate and build a mini base here. And then the rest of it, the interior is for the hub and basically like the feedback loop that we talked about for like you can come out here and you can look at the city and see how your games have progressed over time. But at the same time, it's like what he's talking about, where it's like you get 2 coins of how we're designing this. But yeah, back to you.
So like you can see how the landscape slopes. It became a real problem, which is why I went back to the other method of using the static meshes, because landscape's funky. You got to work with it however you can, and pivot as far as technique goes just to make it look good. And a lot of this is just block out, not pretty yet. Once I start getting into more and more of the details, it'll start looking more and more like Alcatraz right now. But that's pretty much how everything starts. Is like, just like a quick, dirty block out and then start chiseling away at the details. For this one, I started down at the docks because there's a lot of stuff going on down there. That's the main entrance to this zone as far as like players go.
Okay, so isn't it? The dock area down there is probably going to be more so an RTS area like this over here and the parade grounds. Like most of the operator is going to be this area here, and then that building, the main admin building, and then like the idea is that like you figure RTS players could just basically come here and build their bases, have their operations in lore. This is where, actually, Chris, you talk about this. This is your baby. Talk about the store. Talk about what this place is for certain, and then we go back to Efren so you get some talking in.
Oh, well, yeah. What can you go back there? So, I mean, that's a real helipad. Is Efren going to keep that all flat like they did some landscaping?
We have to discuss that one.
The breaks there.
For the design doc, I guess it mentioned that some of the debris that was there was cleared because, Cirque pretty much came in and didn't really respect too much of the historical value of the site and just started bulldozing wherever they could to make room for their operations. There was like a little hill there where the debris was, but I flattened it out after reading the doc. I realized, that would be I mean, even with the hills, it's still a pretty good sized area to build in. So we can go either way with that.
Yeah, so basically, Cirque is this. They had already moved in there. That's where they're dropping off all of their supplies they're going to use to build up Alcatraz to be their main base of operations. So I guess here is like the player will be able to essentially build upon that themselves and decide like what facilities you want and how you're going to carry out certain operations from the island that will impact the rest of
Well, that's
the
more so for the
entire game.
campaign. So keep in mind for pandemic, it's more so just however they want to populate this island for like defensive or offensive or as the last resort, like like a hiding point if like they're getting their asses kicked on the mainland. So,
I mean, there's plenty of room to build too, and not just in the parade grounds. There's the yard or that empty space near the yard.
One of the big things, like you have the parade grounds, you have the little cuts here and there. So the idea is, again, this would be like your base in RTS and an optional place to be in. And then obviously, once he gets finalizing like the design and getting everything situated, we're going to turn this area into like a firing range per se, for like operators and circ stuff or whatever. And then build out the interior and have the divisions inside of here. And the idea is that you would launch like pandemic mode. You would customize your operators. You would launch the campaign. You play the operator specific missions by going into here and basically like, going and interacting with the console or talking to someone. And the idea would be is that like you'd also have like a fast travel system. So if you press like escape or tab, we haven't figured out what key we want to do, like Helldivers or not Helldivers, Space Marine. So then that way you can teleport around the island if you don't want to just walk everywhere. So if you want to just start like a new pandemic map, you'd load in like say somewhere in here and people are talking and communicating and like you hear the ambient noise and dialogue and all that. And then I don't want to walk over there. So you press tab, you press like pandemic, and then it would teleport you to the pandemic console. You press E, and then you'd get the window that you're all accustomed to, and then change whatever you're gonna do, and hit the play button, and then bring in people, and then play. The idea is we want to make the island a character. So you figure you're gonna want to explore, you're gonna want to see what's going on. You're going to want to potentially hear the dialogue and chatter, because then the idea would be is after the initial conception of it is done and it's put in y'all's hand, we'd start sneaking in dialogue and little ambient stuff here and there to give the base more character. But yeah, anything else you want to hit upon, Efren? Okay.
The cell house. Cell house, I've kind of started, playing with ideas of how to build that out. Right now, I'm kind of leaning more towards like a modular set so we can build it piece by piece and try to get it as close as possible to that block out right there, because the block out I modeled using the scan from Google Maps, so it's pretty much the same size as it would be on the island. And most of that's just like, okay, how am I going to build the outer walls and the interiors and still make it work? So a lot of that's just figuring out how that modular set is going to come together without creating too much of like weird clipping or things going on there. And I also want, that's the one thing I'm probably going to work on in the coming days, is getting that in there so we can start, running around and seeing, how the spaces pan out as far as like, is it big enough to house this or what that. Like, I know you in the design doc, you had me knock down some of the walls in the office areas to make, some certain areas bigger.
Yeah, a little bigger.
Yeah. So that's good. That's probably going to be pretty easy, though. I mean, it is a pretty big map. I was worried that you were probably going to be like, "Oh, it's too big."
The biggest thing is it has to accommodate RTS too.
Because yeah. But I mean, yeah, RTS definitely is going to have plenty of room to build here. I think it's going to be an awesome addition to the open world map, and I can't wait to make this playable.
I guess a good comparison is what Earth Alchemist said in general chat, or it's like the COD World War II lobby with the air raids and all that. But going a little bit further than that is, again, like I mentioned earlier, is you can actually see the areas that you're playing in. So we can have like little blueprints and little things that read your save files and basically try and emulate how your play sessions are going in the real world in terms of your last session. So then that way you're like, I burned that city, kind of deal. And you can look out from like these vantage points over here or over here and be like, oh, okay, like an operator mode, and essentially just kind of get a sense of like how the world's progressing per se.
I was thinking we should have like a mini game where you'll see refugees coming to Alcatraz from the mainland.
You figure we could have it. Jesus Christ!
You shoot 'em.
God damn, that's dark. I thought it was going a different way, and then he was like, "Damn, what the fuck?" Okay.
We can't let him come near the island. We're
already.
Oh
my
You
God!
can't let him come
What
near the
have we
island. Put up
done?
the machine gun.
Yeah, you see what happens when he
right?
survives a fire. Yeah, he's gotten hardcore now in this month.
But yeah, so that's the idea there, and we'll have more of the show. We'll keep chipping away because Dimitri will be joining him. He's finishing up the VFX for the Moab, the Mother of All Bombs thing, and then once that's done, then he'll be joining Efren, and then those two will be chipping this down half and half, building the interior out and getting the other playable areas done. So this becomes our new main menu hub world per se. But yeah, anything else you want to add, Efren, before we go on to the next section? Do you want to take questions on this section? Anyone have any questions pertaining to the new main menu, the hub stuff?
I saved one from literally 1984, which lost. No, here it is. He asked. I'm gonna rephrase it because I'm not gonna quote it directly. He asked is it like Helldivers,
yes,
where it's a menu? Or is it also like is it like when you launch a mission, is that indistinguishable, or in the sense of is it both like the Helldivers ship and part of the in-game world?
It's going to be a level loading transition because Helldivers hides that via the jump pod where you're loading the world. Yeah. But the idea would be is that like you would have it to where you go to a console, you choose your custom game settings for pandemic mode, and then there'd be some kind of transition. And that transition would be essentially us loading your settings in your world for playing, the bigger world as a whole for pandemic. But that's the interesting part, is that we can do long-term like what XCOM did or other stuff where you have like little movies that play or whatever. And that'd be great to get to that point. It's just getting the foundation there like with this. And then we have the helipad and the other stuff like that. So we could have intro, outro videos. But those are more like quality of life, like polished things that I would say as we get more resources that we'd look into. But as it is at face value, it would be you go up to a console, you interact with it, UI comes up, and then you choose what you want, and then you launch into the mission, and then be a loading screen. But yeah, we'll look into like a more immersion level of stuff in the future, long term.
So it's the main menu, but in pandemic and in some missions, I assume it will also.
In campaign, this area is your home. Like in campaign, the idea is that you're launching and doing everything from the control room. So after every mission, you're coming back to this island. Like what was that game we had play, Derivar, the Aliens one? Dark Descent. That's a good example. Where it's like they have like their ship. That game is beautiful. Where basically like that, I bought that game for Chris and Derek, just so that when we get to the point of doing the campaign,
so good,
we can learn from how they went about with their game design, how they designed the island and the upgrades and the how people could die in that game, where you have like individual units instead of like a huge thing. So that's something we're gonna have to experiment with in QA test in terms of how we want to handle that. But that game is, I wanted to look at that game definitely from when we get to the campaign for inspiration. It is amazing.
It is. So good. I want to play it now.
Sorry, I regret nothing.
Why'd you bring it up? All right.
I like Dark Descent, but after a while, it kind of wears on you. Like,
I mean, it's not a.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, Burnaby is a heathen. Ignore him.
I am a monster.
Okay, that happened.
that shoots innocent civilians.
All right.
I'm a monster. I'm a monster.
Did anyone have any last questions about Alcatraz before I move on?
Well, can we do what Efren suggested and set up a mounted machine gun and have a little mini game of shooting?
The mini game of shooting civilians. That's great.
Yep. It's just like they're coming in on their little dinghies and their little inflatable rafts. And
that's the Fenrir. That's the Fenrir DLC. Don't worry about that.
Federal assistance.
Yeah.
This is new America after all.
Exactly. It's the new world where you've got to, if you're a civilian, you're not allowed to live.
Anyway,
they're not waiving their birth certificates.
Is there anything on YouTube, Robert?
Okay, then I can't say your name. The Naka Will building interiors be explorable and able to be fought in, or a command and conquer general Starship Troopers command style, where if a building is occupied by infected, they auto clear? So that's a really good question. When it comes down to it, how do I explain this? It's not going to be like a garrison system. Like, we're going more in the direction of just like having it where they can get on the physical rooftops and fight from those. When it comes to like, I'm trying to think, like, there were like 10 structures that have interiors that we were going to have the civilians using. They were closed up recently, but I'm probably going to have them go back and expose some of those. Like a supermarket, it was a couple of hangars. It was like just like a gun store. It was like random places around the map that I wanted the level designers to build out the interiors. So then that way we could have some interior gameplay. It's not within the cards to do all of them. We don't have this team, this size to do something of that scope. But even just having limited ones would be interesting. The campaign will definitely have those kind of interior moments, like the hospital, Chelsea's house, the moments in the book per se. But yeah, no, like there's really not that many interiors in the confines of Pandemic besides the ones we're going to hollow out for the dynamic civilian groups that we have the assets. We just need to put them back in and implement the AI so they know to hoard in there and take cover in there. I'm trying to think. Am I missing anything, Chris, for that? For the interior stuff that we talked about previously?
Is he just asking for Pandemic?
He's just asking generally, I think. Will building interiors be explorable? And like the only time we have planned. Yeah, I don't
Or
know if it's
Alcatraz.
Alcatraz or for everything.
Yeah. I mean, for the campaign, we're going to be building it out more, including some of the old, like, I don't know if people know, but like there's more to Alcatraz than what you just
the whole
see that
underground
goes
network and
back
everything.
more than yeah, like have you ever seen the movie Rock? Like there's like they go in through like the old Civil War forts and work their way up, and that does play into the story, but that stuff will be built out much later. For just the Pandemic is going to be just the surface level. You're not going to be going into the inside yet, are we?
That's safe entirely for the campaign. Like the inside is just for the operator, and then we're closing it off in RTS, so you can't go inside the main wing. And then anything other than that, like interior stuff, is just going to be like maybe 8 or 10 structures that Dimitri and Efren were planning on hollowing out, or they've already hollowed out across the entire world. But yeah, that.
For a campaign, we can't really say yet.
The hospital, Chelsea,
beyond the hospital and Chelsea South.
The underground section. Oh, we can't talk about that.
I wanted like the
spoilers,
country club, and the underground.
Don't tell them.
No,
it's on record now, you fools.
Yeah.
Tell them.
Oh, man. It's on record now.
Tell them. Then it's the surprise. There's going to be interiors on the campaign. Moving on.
Anyway,
you didn't hear anything.
We'll just move on. Anyway.
Hold on, I got the.
Yeah, these are the wrong droids
you're looking for.
All right. And just as a final note to some of the people asking, the island will have a lot of life around it. Like there will be stuff happening. It won't be static. They mentioned
a living,
they want
breathing
it to be,
place.
Well, Robert's quoting Robert.
Yeah,
it wants it to be a character. Wants you to be interested in what's going on the island, and it's not just going to be like a dude standing in the field where you start missions from. But I think. Yeah, in slow motion. I think we can move on to the progress on Doctrines and some of the work being done there.
Hold
on. Oh, all right. I'm holding on.
You're talking about the pictures. Hold on.
But better.
Yeah. It's just some of the... Pull that up.
A moment.
I don't know. It's like the stuff you could do with a living world with the slow-mo sort of thing that they've got when you press spacebar and everything slows down.
Yeah, I'm gonna make some stick videos. Like
you can just watch the car slowly crash into one another.
You guys are horrible.
Oh yeah, what was that racing game? It was a Burnout.
Oh yeah,
where you can do that.
Yeah, Burnout. I love Burnout.
Okay,
yeah,
bringing up my screen now. Share screen. We'll talk about the levy buster first.
I would say the slow-mo mode is turned off in the co-op mode.
When
am I
a
guessing right,
player,
Robert?
if you can't slow-mo right now when it comes to like people on operator. So the moment people are on operator, you can't slow-mo anymore. We don't know how we're going to balance that out. Is the only problem. So that's going to be a point of contention, and we're going to have to QA test and figure it out. Right now, you can do it anytime, but we're planning on locking that when you have operators, because then they'd be annoyed the whole time. Because then you're slow-moing every 5 seconds, and then it's going to piss them off, or like tactical pause. We're going to have to like get with the community on that one, because we don't really have a solution for that one at this time. It's going to be an experimentation thing of like, we get the first build, we play it as developers, we give it to you guys, and we're like, shit, like how do we balance this? We talked about maybe doing like a killing floor type thing, but even then that's unpredictable, and that can be annoying when like its slow-mo kicks in randomly, and then it's like, haha, you're going to slow down for the next 5 seconds. Screw you.
I mean, it works for us on Total War, where we're just
there might be that
communicating
too,
when it's
where
right
it's
on
like
fast
basically
forward
maybe
and
we're
pause and all
overthinking
that.
it, and we just need to unlock it. And then if the players want to slow mo and other operators are getting annoyed, then it needs to be a communication between all the players of like, please don't slow mo. I'm trying to play the game right now. So maybe it's that, because right now slow mo retroactively affects everyone in the entire world, whether it be operators, the infected, players, whatever. So it is something that like we're gonna leave unlocked right now, and we're gonna have to play test in that first build to see if it gets really obnoxious. Anyhow, back to you. Back
to me. All right. Wait, I can't talk about
I know,
the
I'm
work being done
joking.
on the bombs.
Okay, so
I was like,
okay. Anyway, so the first one we have is the GBU 12 Pathway 2. This is basically the baby that you're going to be using and deployed from the Thunderbolt to essentially go on the offensive against Greg, everyone's favorite Leviathan. The idea is that you can essentially use the helicopter sensor network to find his tunnels, find where he's sleeping, and then essentially be able to deploy this as like a one-off, like with charges, whatever, like airstrikes. That essentially it just comes in, it shoots that, and it detonates in the tunnels, destroying them or waking him up. Because as you know, sometimes when you fight Greg or Mr. Leviathan, he can go and hide if you don't kill him quick enough. And then he'll go and sleep and heal, and then he'll come back and hunt you down with friends sometimes. So the idea is just kind of giving that a better visual pass for what we have right now in experimental and normal, where it's like the Black Hawk, and then it's an ability, and then you click a little location, and then there's no effect, it just happens. Like there's an explosion on the ground, and it pisses off Greg, and then he'll come hunting for you, or he'll move somewhere else sometimes. So yeah, that was a big thing, is polishing this up and getting it to where it's final implementation for Doctrines. And then the next thing was the big airstrike that we've been working on. This one right here, which is, we'll bring up the abbreviation. It is the GBU 43-B Moab. And the idea is that, again, I think Dimitri was saying that we're going to do it with the AC-130 or the C5, or still debating which one. And the idea is that this is an endgame airstrike, and you build a command tent or like a special tent, and as long as that's alive, it can coordinate airstrikes, kind of like the super weapons from Command & Conquer 0 Hour, where you have like a countdown clock or whatever. The idea is, in this case, you get it immediately, and then you can use it, and then there's a time period. And this would be like a whole neighborhood, an entire zone practically in most cases, where the idea is you drop this and everyone's dead in its radius. There's no one surviving. It would tick and kill everyone in the buildings, and it's going to kill everything in its radius is the idea. And this is an endgame bomb, missile, whatever. And that's a basic gist. And theoretically, you don't even want to do this as a last resort of like you're losing territory and you just want to spite the infected. Or maybe you use it as an opening salvo where you've cordoned off an area of the infection, and you do that to basically clear the initial pathway in, and to basically send in troops to mop it up, or whatever is going to come outside of the area of influence, to basically try and research basically dominance in the area, per se. And then the idea is that, obviously, if you start using this on civilians, or you start using this in heavily populated areas, everyone's going to hear about it, and then it's going to start rolling reputational losses. And then you'd have long-term implications by using this in civilian neighborhoods and civilian areas where you haven't evacuated everyone. Because we have this civilian evacuation system, theoretically, you could pair the usage of this bomb with that system, where you just tell everyone in the zone, vacate, go to the next zone. I'm expecting the infected here in the next 10 to 20 minutes. If you're still here, don't care. I'm dropping the bomb, kind of deal. Because you figure, and that way you can also use it as aerial denial. So it's one of those things, area denial. So it's one of those things where like it's going to have a lot of use cases depending on the nuances of how you play your games. Whether it be you go umbrella, you go the good guys, or you go somewhere in the middle where you kind of choose based off of like in the moment what makes the most sense based off of your tactical goals and how you're trying to play this session. So at least gives you that versatility. And the VFX for this one is being worked on as we speak. Hopefully it'll be done the next 2 or 3 days, give or take, because it's a very complicated VFX from Niagara. The one right here is already done for the Bunker Buster. And essentially we just need to implement it on the C++ because it's so complicated. And then that way we can just show you guys in its finite state of like how it works and its timing. And it's a bunch of individual Niagara effects that we spawn at different times via the impact and then the explosion on the ground, you know, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's fun stuff there. And then did you want me to segue into the operators or save that for later? Okay.
Hold on. I think. Oh wait. Okay. So in this, it's not bad, but you asked me to bring up passive and active.
Oh right. Might as well cover that too. So one of the things that I've been working on this week, and I will go into the player test, and I'm going to. I'll delete him, and then let's spawn into players. And then let me move that viewport over just a moment. Oh, I hate when it does that, or it clips it like that. So one of the things that I've been working on is having it to where you could have a modular health actor component that would make our lives a lot easier for active and passive health regen. So if I go to the health component over here, you can see there's a lot of configuration for basically like healing, passive and active. And an example would be like the infection pods using the passive one. But the idea is that when they're out of combat, they'll heal themselves. Chelsea does passive. But active would be an example of like an active rebuild. So like if you have an ability where Abrams takes damage, this system that we program facilitates being able to turn it on and off as needed, and then being able to configure the rates that they heal. So then that way you could have it to where an Abrams or a unit can self-heal themselves as an ability. And it's very plug and play and easy to work with. So let's say I go in this corner. I wonder if, I think I left it on. Hold on. Yeah, it's on passive and passive. That'll work. So if I go over here and I go in this corner as a damage taking volume, and you'll see the concept of what I've been working on. And that way it applies to structures, vehicles, people, and we can turn it on and off based off of demand. So when they get to like 20% health, if you walk away, after a 5-second grace period, it will start healing her via active health regen. So for the operators, this would be like a Call of Duty level of system where it brings your operator back to like a 40% health, 30% health, is an example. But in RTS, it's basically like what I talked about for the infection pods. It's the maybe a special lieutenant or special units that can heal through damage, and they're healing faster than you're doing certain types of damage. So it gives us the versatility to be able to deploy this on a per case basis as needed, and it's still replicated. So if I go over to little Timmy over here, dead, because that 50% health was replicated. So now, even though she healed, it didn't fully heal. There's your team killing for whoever asked earlier. And it was basically one of those things where we have the passive and the active. The passive is based off of you don't take damage like a normal health regen. And then the active is basically it heals regardless of the damage that you received last. And it will have a maximum and a minimum. And that was, I know it's been kind of slow this last week, but we've wanted to make sure that this time around we have a very robust, extendable, like all-encompassing tool set for the game, so we can deploy and test new abilities and re-implement older abilities in a cleaner and more modular way. So then that way it's like very easy to do things, and we can prototype systems and mechanics a long time in the future for like 3 years, 5 years kind of deal, where it's like this is a framework we can keep extending and expanding, but it's very planned out, it's very clean, it's very optimized. You know, one of the things that I'm going to be working on going into next week is I'll show you, is if I click on, well, I'll just switch it to one player. There's no reason to have two right now. It's like one of the things I've been working on is basically we're going to have like an actor component we can dynamically add on the characters so they can resupply. So the Bradley, the barracks, the motor pool, the heliport, those would all have like a special resupply actor point that does the asynchronous checking to basically check who's in the radius. And then you can configure it on a per case basis and say, like, oh, that gives ammo, that gives health, that gives gas, that cures infection level, like a medical tent. And you take that and you abstract it into an actor component. You add the asynchronous tasking. You don't do it on the tick, but you do it based off of like a loop on a timer. And you space it out over 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8 milliseconds, so it all doesn't hit the CPU at the same time. And you do distance checks against all the units in the game. And at that point, you're able to make a very cheap and efficient way of giving ammo and medical and supplies to people. It doesn't show up in the profiler, and it's highly optimized, and it just spaces out its resupplies over milliseconds instead of trying to do everything in one moment. So then that way your CPU doesn't hit your guts for playing Cepheus, because you figure, or relying on the overlap checks that are natively in the engine that are expensive. Once you go over like 50 to 100 characters, you can't generate overlaps anymore, because you figure it's too expensive to check that every tick. So you have to do it based off of like just the old-fashioned math code, which is more complicated, but it does the job, and it's more performant, which is not as user-friendly off the get. But that's something I'm going to be working and showing going into like Monday, Tuesday. I'm going to try and do some last-minute polish to the health component. I also wrote the inventory component recently. That was basically like their inventory, their melee weapons, their Glock, their M4, you know, their pending weapon, their last equipped weapon, what profile you're using based off of like, we have a profile system for the operators, and this is unique to the operators because every character has their own unique inventory component derived from a base one. So then that way I can write how a character uses a gun, and then we can extend it for the vehicles or extend it for people, the particulars, but it's still replicated from a high level standpoint. So we've done more with less, per se, in terms of like overriding multicast or implementations. So then that way we can replicate like a base taking damage, and then it just works for everyone. And we have hooks and systems that we tie into, whether it be from a blueprint or a C++ standpoint, and it just works. So that was a big initiative. Like the unit component is like metadata, like your unit minimap icon details, and basically the hook to every other actor component that we use, like data, like abstract stuff that every unit in the entire game would ever use, like the interaction with the fog of war, their interaction with like factions, like that kind of stuff, because everyone has an interaction with on those levels, or like if a unit is selectable. Because a big push this time around was having it to where every unit in the entire game is selectable, because that was a huge, colossal fuck up that we did when we first made the game. Is that you could not select little Timmy here. You couldn't select the bridge. You couldn't select ambient objects. So you couldn't see like the particulars of a unit. Like, yeah, you can't give this guy an order. He's not going to listen to me. He's not going to move because there's a faction check. But at the same time, I can see his health, his faction. Yes, it says Cirque. We're getting infected logos made right now. We're going to just take pictures of the infected and then put them down there. And then basically just have it to where it would show you good and bad against. And then if they have a melee weapon, it would show you here, and it would show their damage. And it would show you, if they hit you, how much infection damage they apply. So that way you have more meaningful information like this for the UI I showed earlier in the podcast about an hour ago at this point. So just keep in mind that like you figure sometimes maybe we don't post as actively in the what is it called, that bloody channel? The daily updates blog, is because we're working hours, days on just making sure we're planning for every eventuality for the health component, the inventory component, to make it easier to work on the vehicles, to make it easier to work on the structures, to make it easier to work on something. Like, for instance, the structure would not get an inventory component. a structure would only have a unit component and a health component and a stimuli vision component, so it can provide line of sight into the world, basically. So we can take these abstract containers and we can deploy them selectively to be able to extend functionality very quickly, and it's replicated and it just works. And then we can override it. Because I was playing, what we were playing last night, Chris, Age of Empires 3? No, 4. We were playing that, and I was like 4. Jelly of their decay system, where they have like a system where when buildings would get destroyed, it'd be a ruin sometimes. Where it'd be like a part of the building was left there, and I was like, I'm going to steal that idea. That's a good idea. Like, I know people have talked about that previously. Dimitri has talked about it in terms of like having like a foundation or like a ruin part, so you can see if a building was there previously. You know, so it's one of those things where it's like, those are cool things that we can build this type around, like the details panel, and make the game fire on all calibers, hit all the points everyone wants us to hit, get the co-op in, you know, and everything else, and put our best foot forward in terms of basically its execution and expectations from the community as a whole. But yeah, I went off again. So on you too.
No, that's good actually. I was. That's sort of one of the big things when we were talking about Rex and stuff staying longer, was in that same vein of having the environment tell a story through gameplay, where you can see, you know, something has been destroyed here, and or, you know, if it's your battle, you can come back through and be like, wow, this is when I fought this thing, and instead of save scumming and giving up, I fold back, and now I'm coming back and you know, reclaiming this area. It's I don't know. I think it's something that gets ignored in a lot of games. Is the idea of like, especially RTSs,
see, being like able to come back scars of your battle
on larger maps.
Some amount of persistence. Now we experimented with that with the dynamic civilian groups, where the idea is that, well, the idea on paper was to have it to where when you left a zone, even if you weren't involved, some dynamic civilian groups, walls and encampments would stay even after they were died. So then that way it could give some ambience if like something else happened here. Not everything is handled by you. Like Chelsea, other civilian groups will get over on each other and kill each other. And that was one of the things where I feel like this time around, we're going to apply a little more nuance to kind of how we implement that, because it was a good idea at face value, but it never really fired on all cylinders going into like implementing Pandemic Light, where we need to have, because it was a confusion mechanic, like the Leviathans and the Greg holes, where people didn't understand you had to use explosives to destroy the tunnel entrances. So a part of it is having better visual feedback, like the details panel, and like giving them that active information. But the other part is having it to where like we need to make some changes or some alterations of like the walls. No one really understood you had to clear an encampment after you killed the encampment by the recycle remove tool. So that's something I want to look at in the second pass, to have it to where like maybe after you delete them, they can just destroy it normally the old-fashioned way, and maybe not make the walls invulnerable, because that was a weird design decision that we made, where only like the Juggernaut and certain enemies could destroy the walls or whatever, even after they were destroyed. And it was like, it made sense on paper, but it was one of those things where it just never really worked, I feel like, in gameplay, and it just frustrated people. So it was one of those things where like we need to go back on that as an example of why we're doing Pandemic Light at the end is a small little section. So when we re-implement this, I can take into consideration the Steam reviews. I can take into consideration what people have said on Discord, on Steam forums. I can do some searching, make a Word document, index everything that they've said at that point that I missed, and basically be like, oh, okay. I mean, off the top of my head, I know every single complaint there is with the engineer in the building, you know, but like if that's another example where I know there's some friction there and I need to fix that this time around, I would say. What were you going to say? Sorry.
Yeah. Actually, no, I was.
Okay.
I'll message you after. Don't worry about it. Because otherwise I'm going to go off.
My thing about persistent wreckage, to just kind of hark back on that, is I was trying to look it up which game I played before that actually does that. A game called Regiments, right? If you fail a mission or succeed in a mission, and that battle is taking place on that same area, the wreckages are persistent. if you had a big tank battle, or if you lost a regiment in this area, and you came back to that area, all the husks of your tanks would still be
So
sitting.
do they
Every
save
map
it? How
is
long?
As from what I've played, I only really ever played 2 hours of the game because I played the demo when it was out before the game actually released. When I experienced it, I probably came back to a location maybe 6 or 7 times, and
Was it
the
open world
wreckages were
or was
still
it
there.
instance where you spawn in the maps like Total War?
It's not open world. I think it's more like Total War. What game mode was I playing? I
So
think I was
that's
playing the
pretty
Rogue Light.
simple because all you do is you save that
game.
into a save file every time you leave the map, and then basically you reload that save file to bring that level of persistence back in. The only problem is when you get to an open world where it can become unsustainable to basically have hundreds, if not thousands, of carcasses, whether it be people or vehicles, over a vast map. I tried to find a meaningful balance by having it to where corpses can stay in the map for 5 minutes, and then when you save, it'll do a cleanup pass, and basically it'll save some of them, but not all of them, so it doesn't bloat your save file. But it was one of those things where it was like, I feel like to get to, I think Starship Troopers, that recent game, had a really cool system for this. Like you could have like
Mercenaries. Mercenaries keeps your destruction around, at least until you load.
Payground
Like
of
if you exit the
Destruction.
game and you load back in, then it resets the world.
Oh,
Yeah, the
Yeah, I
second
know.
one. Like whatever
No,
you
the
destroy
buildings I
stays
get.
destroyed. Every base.
Yeah, because
and
those
every
are
building.
localized assets that you can stream in and out as you leave, and all you do is you load a state for every grid, and then you change the mesh, you spawn some VFX, or you spawn some additive destruction, and then you can fake it that it's still there. Because in those games, my understanding is when you leave a grid and come back in, all it does is it loads the unbroken state, and then it rapidly serializes it, loads whatever has to load, change the mesh, add in the destruction and the objects of if it saves it or if it's always the same type of destruction, and it fakes it before the human perspective can get there, and it's all smoke and mirrors. But my thing is that because it's an RTS, there are some limitations. Now I know of some ways, like the Starship Trooper dev team that made like that FPS game, whatever, I forget its name, that you were playing, Duravar. They recently like showed off some really cool tech where they could have like hundreds of dead bodies for the xenomorph. What are they called in that game? The arachnids. And
Arachnids.
that's something that we need to look into tech-wise, because I have a theory on how to do it, where you convert them into static mesh instance objects. They can't have collision for some degree, or you generalize their collision, where you do a trace or a capsule or some kind of system where it tries to group dead bodies together. And so, because you can't have individual collision for every single one, because after a certain point, that's going to destroy your CPU. So you have to have a system that looks around. It's like, you're a dead body. You're a dead body. You're a dead body. And it basically would turn off their individual collisions and then generate a new collision as that husk gets bigger and bigger. So that way you could have like a pile of dead bodies that block a street or whatever. And then you could have a landscapable system to clear it. If like you just keep killing people that keep coming at you from this area, it would make a destruction. But it's one of those technical hurdles that I feel like once these major line items are situated, we need to look into and see if we can accomplish things like that. Because again, I have some ideas of, you'd have to take a skeletal mesh, take their pose, take their ragdoll, convert them into a static mesh or a static mesh instance, turn their collision off, and then have a system that pulses the world around their dead bodies and tries to find other dead bodies to turn off their collision and basically assimilate them into a husk of collision. A dynamically generated one. So theoretically, it's very possible. I've seen it done in another indie game. But yeah, it's something that I'm thinking about, and it's like we don't have the resources to execute on, but it'd be fucking amazing if we could do that. Because again, right now, I feel like the compromise is having the corpses and the 3 to 5 minutes that they last, and then you can configure how long they last if you have a really better computer or CPU-based one. Because you need a really good CPU and RAM to keep those objects in persistence after you get to a certain amount, because they just add and add and add. It's a constant cost for every character that dies and gets given in the world. We mitigate some of it, but it's not completely mitigatable to a certain degree. You still have to keep them in memory. But anyhow, yeah, back to you two.
I think, yeah, Yeah, I think we can
Excellent.
move on to the
So,
operators.
the operators. One of the big things for me and Michael was not making them a gimmick and then having them enough customization to make people happy to where they can get some cool permutations of aesthetics and whatnot. So here, let me bring those up. I'm going to open them up real fast, and then we'll talk about Chelsea at the end. So let me switch to my share screen. And then I'm going to open up Edge. And we're going to... I don't use Edge. I only use Edge for the stream because it doesn't have my bookmarks and all the other crap. And basically, this is one of the operators. This is another one where basically we're making a bunch of male and female operators that essentially you can pick and you can customize them as your boots on the ground, your winters. But you can bring in quite a few of them. They just take up pop and cost, and they're basically operators that you train and you choose like what they're proficient in, what kind of abilities they have. Think of it as a build a hero, where the idea is that essentially you are able, like Battle for Middle Earth, like not that many games do this anymore, but the idea is that you choose the initial skin, camo, whatever, the aesthetic, and then you take that and you name them as a profile, a class, and then you take that class and you level it up. You level up his base stats, you level up his weapons, and then you're able to use that to basically add attachments onto the weapons, to add abilities onto him, and to spec him in I think it's 9 different bars that we had based off of health, infection resistance, melee damage, movement speed, noise that they emit in the world when they move. So then that way we wanted to give people the versatility and the ability to build their cloak and dagger, cutthroat, covert ops group. They can build their medic, their engineer, their whatever, whatever you want to do is the idea. Is we want to make it to where essentially when we implement them, because here I'll show you guys. So let me go to the main menu, and I'll show you the old prototype we made a year ago that we're building this new co-op Cepheus foundation on. So if I go to customization, and then I go to edit weapon loadout, you can see the pistols, the melee weapon, the grenade. We broke the grenade because we're actually re-implementing the grenade as an ability instead of a standoff, because that was bad for modularity and extendability. So we're turning that into an ability that we just swap out. And the profiles, and then the aesthetics. It's probably going to shader compile, so it's going to freeze for a second. Because I haven't been in here since... Oh, wait. You know what? Michael might have broken that. Yeah, I think Michael broke it. Because he was changing out the meshes and optimizing them the other day. So he probably broke that last night or early in the week. So I'll have to send him a message in his reports channel. But the idea was that this was going to be expanded. And it would be for RTS and TPS. So this is your hero, your boots on the ground, your winters that you can make do however you want to play the game, build them towards different purposes. The only things that aren't implemented at this time are the what am I thinking of? The grenade, the melee. We're gonna come back to for them. Is the melee is not implemented? The grenade needs to be re-implemented, and then we're gonna add the ability switcher after we do the abilities for everyone else. So after we going into next week, we're doing the formations. We're getting ahead of myself. We're finishing up whatever needs to be done for the health component that I showed earlier. We're going to be doing the money and sharing system for co-op. We're going to be doing the formation system finalization. And then, depending on how that goes at that point, we're going to be working on getting in the rest of the static abilities, patrol, all the other stuff. And then get the other circuit, and then either move to the ability system or structures, depending on how the week goes. Because we need to get the building system in with the engineer, and we need to get it so you can recruit the infantry from the barracks and just kind of get the gameplay loop back to where it needs to be for the RTS elements. But yeah, so that's in a nutshell of the initiative that we're doing for the operator and all of the aesthetics. You can see more examples in there. The only other thing that I would mention is that we got where's Chelsea? Here she is. We got a base version, a better version made for Chelsea with all the newer standards of character modeling. So we got this, and we got the close-up rendered in there, and she's in the engine now to basically be able to be the primary big baddie that you're going to fight throughout the game. So that's done. That's situated. She's in the engine and imported with the operator pass. Michael should be starting. What do you think? He should be done with the operators, depending on some last-minute approvals in the next couple of days. And ideally, he's going to be working on the civilians soon. From basically, once we get once Valve pays the next couple of days, we're going to allocate that to working on the civilians and essentially getting them remade with the same standards for the operators, the Circ, and everyone else. Oh, I lied, and the scientists. He still has to put in approval for the scientists before he starts the civilian. So he needs to get the new scientists in, because that one needs to be brought up to latest standards. With whatever operator changes, he needs to get approval for. And then we're working on the civilians. Anyhow, back to you two.
Yeah.
Becky.
I feel like I've been doing all the talking over you, Donavia. Do you want to speak words? Because I'm just a douche.
No, that's all right. I've kind of just been texting back and forth, so kind of.
I'm fine to continue. I just
I'm
thought
very
give you
been
some
very
space.
happy with you kind of talking.
All
Anyway, so kind of harking on the operator stuff. That sort of a personal question of mine is when it comes to you see, make our own person. What's the level
Right
of
now,
customization?
it's relegated to different like models, like Call of Duty, Overwatch, where it's like different entire aesthetics. So you have like a base aesthetic for an operator, and then Michael's initiative, his goal was to have at least 3 permutations for every base skin. So technically, you're getting 4 for every operator that you get. And they might be distinctly different, where they maybe sport some like GIGN, like German operator outfits and things, or they might just be like the basic Circ outfit, or like the Predator one, kind of looking one I showed earlier, where it had like that Praetorian kind of mask kind of deal. That's really cool that Michael has a fetish for. So I let him put it in for that one, where like I'll show it on the share screen, where Michael has a fetish for this helmet. So I was like, fine, put it in. Yeah, so put it in. It's fine. Put it in. I know it exists in real life. I don't like it. I think it looks goofy. But, it's one of those things where it's like, I was like, fuck it. Put it in. Let's do it. Obviously, people like it. It's why it exists. It's why it exists in a bunch of other games. So let's get some diversity there in terms of the different loadouts and kits that we have in the game. So that is an outfit for, like, say, one of the other, like, base ones. So, like, give me an example. Is that this would be a base operator. And then you would have 2 to 3 other skins that you can swap to. When it comes to like a full character customizer, because of scope and budget, me and Michael were like, that's just not in the cards. Maybe if we blow up, we make a bunch of money off of the co-op, and then we can bring in someone that's a specialist that could help us figure out that aspect, and we can look into like a BDO level of stuff. But for right now,
this is similar to
yes,
like
I mean, World War Z is basically the closest example I can also. Yeah, you're right. World War Z or Call of Duty or Battlefield, where you just have like the base one. In my perfect mind, I would have customization, but I was shut down based off of it. It wasn't realistic at this time, based off of just the amount of time and work it would go into it. It would negatively affect every other aspect of development. It would take like a long time of R&D, getting it right, the model authoring and everything else. So we were just like, it's not in the cards right now. We're going to have to roll with the punches, put it on a sticky note, and maybe in the future, we have like an option where you can create your own. But for right now, it has to stay this way, based off of just generally the level of detail that we'd want to put in, where we didn't want to just half-ass it if we did do that way. Anyhow, go.
Something else I'm wondering is when you said to sort of train your own operator, like train up your operators. What scale are you aiming for when it comes to leveling up and going all out with sort of operators? Because like when I think like leveling up, I think unlocking sort of kind of like a tech tree, but not really a tech tree. You know what I mean?
I'll show you.
Yeah. So it's like kind of leveling. You'll level up and unlock all different types of stuff, like newer guns, better looking stuff.
Give me one moment.
Attachments,
I will
like that.
show you. Give me 1 second. What was that console command that I gave Michael? There we go. Set current weapon level. Okay, we're gonna switch that to the carbine. Oh, I can't show it. It's actually not. We haven't. I guess it's broken right now, but I'll just show. Share screen. Do I have? Oh, I have share screen over already. So again, it's like I guess it's not working right now because again we haven't touched this area of design in a year. But the idea would be is that we have a gunsmith where weapons have. Oh wait, it's reading as level 0. We can go back and go there. Yeah, it's 14 now. But it's not populating the attachment because this project was updated to a newer version of the engine. And then with all the other changes that we did, we probably broke the linkers. But I'll just show you an abstraction. Is that the idea is that like you'd go in here and you would change like the foregrip. You'd go here and you change the magazine. You'd go here and you would change the scope. You go here and you would change the silencer or like the barrel or something like that. So the idea is that each stat or weapon would affect RTS and TPS equally in terms of giving your operator some proficiency in some types of killing, some types of weapon handling, and X, Y, and Z. And each weapon, a little bit further than that because we wanted to make sure there was enough progression to where it wasn't a gimmick. So the idea is that I unlocked all the weapons while you were talking. So like I could switch to like these different guns, like the MP7 per se. But I don't think that one was actually put in. Yeah, the Scorpion Evo. And then basically you could customize it, tweak it to your heart's content, make it look sexy, put a camo on there, and then take it into RTS or take it into TPS. And there were 2 ways of leveling them up. One was grinding them out in Pandemic, and the other way was playing either Horde, Arcade, or Survival mode in the CPO section of the hub that we're making. Well, you're going to have like a weapons range where you can go and you can test your characters, like a quartermaster. And then you would have like a section where you'd launch operator missions, like these 2, where it's like you go here, you choose that. It's a crude little prototype we made. Oh, Michael broke that animation too. Yeah, that's kawaii.
That's just how they deploy now.
But like you can see that like
they're just built different.
You figure there's quite a bit here in terms of basically like you can play these little modes and you can level them up and then you can take them under Pandemic mode and basically have like a level 20 or level 30. As it stands right now, we're planning on 50 levels for every class and up to 14 to 20 levels for weapons to unlock attachments, skins as you're playing. Because again, there was a guy in here, I think a couple weeks ago, that was hitting on us in terms of like making sure that if you're going to put this in, don't make it a gimmick. And, you know, me and Michael kind of took that to heart. We've kind of had that as a concern going ahead where it's like, if we're going to do the operators and we're going to make that interoperability with the RTS and the TPS, it needs to have that fleshed out feel. It needs to play like its own game. But then when it's brought into the RTS, there's that cohesion where it's not like any other RTS game you can play on the market, where you can have your team of operators playing on the ground, and then you can have your RTS players playing from a God's eye view, commanding units, bringing in stuff, doing airstrikes. You know, you could have an operator have a radio man ability, and he's calling in the airstrikes for the RTS player. You know, because you figure an example would be of the new ability system is we're going to make the radio operator's passive ability to call in airstrikes an ability that you would take. So on like an operator. So you could make it an RTS or TPS. And let's say I go to the main menu and I spawn in and I go to customization. When we get to that point of doing the ability system, sometime next week or the week after that, we're going to come in here and we're going to upgrade this system. We're going to implement the ability system in here. So you can pick and choose abilities that we give the infantry, give them a cost. Like you take this is every time you level up, you get like a talent point. And that talent point goes into like allocating a stat. But then also you get another point that would basically be like an ability point. They like different abilities cost different amounts. And you would essentially pick the ones based off of how you want the specific operator to play. And that way, by leveling them up, you get more talent points and you get more of those little per points, or I don't know what we're going to call them. But basically the idea would be those ability points where essentially you could choose 3 abilities, or maybe you choose only 1 or 2 because some of these abilities are like 2 or 3 points and you only get 1 every area of their level or something like that. So that's something that we're going to be implementing next week, and we'll have more to show. There's a chance it could bleed over based off of like everything I say is speculative, or like you plan something, but no plan actually survives contact with the enemy, where it's like we go in with the intentionality of putting this in, putting that in, putting this in, but then Derek brings something to my attention. Someone in the public Discord brings something to my attention. Or like basically like we have to pivot over to this or that, and it might take a little bit longer, but we're going to stick with it and get it all the way down to the finish line in terms of trying to fit it all in this Q1 audit section. So that's going to be the goal. And you figure we'll update you guys along the line in the reports channel that's on the public Discord. And then we'll have our, I guess you could say, our little report that we do weekly in here to kind of talk about it and get y'all's concerns and feedback. I'm trying to think. Does that answer your question, Derivar, how progression is going to work? Okay,
Yep,
so
that
what other... Do we have any questions from anyone in the community on YouTube on thinking for this?
Yeah, people, if you have questions about operator mode, start putting them in now.
Oh yeah,
I've
your
got a
friends
question,
were waiting to
boss.
buy the game until we got that in, weren't they? You were telling me about that. But they were like, they don't even play RTS
yeah,
games.
they are. But
And you were like, yeah.
Yeah, my friends were like,
Yeah,
I was
RTS,
like, well,
what the
I've put a
fuck
game
is that?
for
And
you.
I'm like, oh god, I
but,
cringe. But it's a beautiful balance of like everyone can come in and get what they want. And you know what I mean? What were we gonna say though?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously operator mode is being pretty fleshed out, and I think the most contemporary example I could think of would be something like Helldivers, where you're calling in your own supports and stuff as well, working in concert with the commander. But I was curious if you had any plans around vehicle usage
Not
for
right
operators.
now, but it's on my list because you figure there are some things that were brought to my attention in the last couple of weeks for how Epic does their replication for vehicles for its only server side. So there'd be some kind of jankiness and roughness if operators controlled vehicle in a multiplayer experience. I know that in Legacy, what we used to have it for the vehicles could be controlled by the operator, and it was only relegated to the ground vehicles and helicopters weren't supported. We left that in there for a time period, but then it kind of got relegated to like it needed more time in the oven. We need to test it in 5.4 and then test it again when 5.5 is more stable and see if they've improved it. I know that in 5.5 they just released it for Lego Fortnite, where they have modular vehicles that actually work light years better than they ever have before in the engine, and they're fully replicated and predicted on the server and client side. So it's something, it's something like, you know, the modular Lego, like you could build your own vehicles in Lego Fortnite.
Yeah, because especially with the physics system you've got for the vehicles now, it'd be
fucking hilarious
to be able to appreciate
that Fortnite benefits us. We had such a wild game difference.
Also, it looks like
I've already invited him to speak, but he won't come on. What a dick! Anyway, what were you saying?
How rude!
I think he's on his phone. He just got off work at
place.
So you figure he's probably driving and he hasn't seen I sent him a notification to speak. Yeah.
Oh, he's typing in the chat. Here we go. Because I really love the vehicle system. You know, when you updated to the new physics, and I was like,
it's beautiful.
This is great.
The
pathfinding is a
but you
bitch,
figure
but
it's one of those things where it's like
it'd be beautiful, like watching my pals drive around in like a Humvee, like actually flooring it around corners and using the vehicle physics. Like,
what's
to
interesting
the max would be really beautiful. So
we need to test
I hope,
because you figure the part that I'm not fully understanding based off like we haven't tested it yet because we haven't brought over the Chaos vehicles to this new project is per se when we get to it. We need to put vehicles into a map and we need to try driving it. Because I've seen YouTube videos and tutorials and documentation of people complaining on the forums that there's like a desync or there's like a handling issue where like the server handles perfectly, but then the clients feel kind of like slow or sluggish. Like you almost get like a force feedback loop where like the clients aren't able to like predict properly and the server's trying to like update everything and it's panicking because there's no client-side prediction, I guess. I'm not sure of the exact technicals, but we need to test that because you figure that's going to be one of the things that we look at and we're like, okay, we can't do that yet, but it's going to be on our to-do list because that's huge for me. I mean, at the very least, worst case, you just have to have a garrison system where if an operator enters a vehicle, they just go into a storage slot and then the RTS players ferry them around. Where the idea would be is that like they attach to a socket in the back of an Atlas. They can shoot from the Atlas per se. but they're relying on the RTS player as the driver per se to get them where they're trying to go. That's not worst case scenario, but it's something that we're actively looking at in terms of the technical ability of the engine.
Yeah.
And what we can engineer ourselves. What are you saying?
Yeah. Sorry, we've
Excellent.
got about 10 minutes left on the schedule.
Questions?
So any
I guess
questions about
anything,
operators? Right? Operator questions first.
Yeah.
But yeah, with 10 minets, if you haven't got a question about operators,
punches,
but anything else, it's open floor. Ask away. Air Tank here asks, will tanks and infantry be able to form formations like in Homeworld?
Well, I think Durvar tried to get me to play that game. So that is actually one of the things that's one of the things that we're building the foundation. Okay, so we have an initial offering for the formation system. And going into this week, me and Derek need to sit down and we're going to agree on how vehicles are going to operate with people. And then we're going to agree on the 2 or 3 formations that we're going to allow for vehicles. So this time, based off of the density of the world, I think it's not realistic to do really complicated formations for the vehicles, and to basically have it where there's a column and there's like a 2 by column and line per se, and that's the most complicated they get. Because think about the density of objects in our world is when you start to get into like wedges and left escalon and right escalon for vehicles, it falls apart. It puts their pathfinding into a situation where they can only fail because they can't keep that like a human being would be based off of their size and how they handle. So it's one of those things where it's like we're looking at when this next pass, so when we get to the formation and then later implementing the vehicles, is having it to where you have a group of, when you select infantry plus vehicles, the infantry will either do column or line, depending on your setting, and then the vehicles would fall in its subdivisions, it breaks by 2 by 2 or 1 by 1, going all the way back, instead of trying to emulate these really complex formations and then failing because there are so many cars everywhere. It's going to piss you off because they can't even maintain it. Any semblance of we only plan on the world becoming more dense and more populated and trying to push it to a level of division because their atmosphere is beautiful. So it's one of those things where we need to be realistic in terms of how we implement the formation system this time around. And keep in mind that with wall partition, it allows us a lot more versatility in how we build the world, how we optimize the world, and how we pathfind the world per se. So it's going to be a compromise there is what I feel like. And I feel like that's the best compromise. For helicopters, that's a completely different story because they're flying in the air and we're redoing them. There's a reason why we didn't just rush it and put them in, blah, blah, blah. We're either going to do the helicopters or the ground vehicles first. We might do the helicopters first because I want to look into getting a nav layer for the air. So what they do is we have an invisible box for navigations built, and they navigate 500 feet on there. So they actually can do object avoidance for structures. So that's something we're going to be looking into to make sure the helicopters don't crash into stuff anymore. And then obviously doing the vehicles and making them all work. Now helicopters can potentially have 3 or 4 formations because they're just a lot more. There's nothing really to get in their way as long as the AI is more sophisticated in terms of them building dodging. They just know to go up, swerve right, swerve left. So we'll give some leeway there, at least for the helicopters. But yeah, any other questions?
Could it be possible to further down the line for a call to arms style vehicle control system?
That's basically what I was talking about previously. I can't answer that question until I test 5.4 when we get the vehicles. And then we test it again in 5.5 because I have some concerns based off of their authoritative model of it's only done on the server and it's not done on the client. And I've seen a lot of people complaining about it recently in the last year or so and beyond that. In terms of it can be very janky when you introduce multiplayer to a vehicle in the Unreal Engine for that. And if someone did figure it out, it was a custom solution that a big studio did that they probably paid $10,000, $20,000 for that we don't have the money or the budget for. So it's one of those things where it's we need to see what Epic has in store for us with current implementation, try 5.5, and then reevaluate as we roll with the punches, per se. So I'd love to, but I don't have an answer at this time. What are you going to say? Next one? I am checking YouTube.
Check YouTube.
We have Nika. Let's see what we have here. Oh, Nika. Yeah, he pronunciated his name. Okay, so Nika asks, will there be unique death animations for circ units and civvies like an infected grappling a human, or just ragdolling at 0 HP, or death animations that go into a ragdoll? Nika. Okay, so Nika asked that, and that's something that me and Michael want to do long term for when we get access through our mocap suit again, because you figure we have to pay the licensing fee for that, and it's really expensive. So it's one of those things that we have a mocap suit sitting in our closet, and the licensing fee is so high to use it that we haven't paid for it yet. So we've renewed it per se. So when we get to that point, I think after co-op and we're starting to do the campaign again, we're going to basically need to like look into that and have him come down or rent a venue and get some actors to do it so we can mocap out these death animations and have them be custom. And the ones that we prototyped in CPO were from asset packs. And you can't, I mean, unless you go frame by frame, you can't really tell if that's from like an animation generic pack from like the Unreal Marketplace. But I'd like to get to a point like the characters, like some of the other stuff where they're more uniquely ours and they're more particular to the situation and more finite per se. So yeah, it's something we can't technically do now, but it's something me and Michael are talking about long term. Back to you two. There's no other questions on YouTube. Let me take. There's nothing on Steam. They're just watching.
Yeah, we've got I think one big one.
My
that
body
should
is ready
take
for
up
big
the last
questions.
few minutes from Blue is will there be more civil unrest caused conflict, and will it be customizable? Specifically, I think this goes into the just redoing
What we talked about.
The civilians, the ambient civilians. Yeah, just generally redoing that whole sort of ambient, the fort system with the ambient civilians and all of that.
Spicy one. Where's the question so I can read it?
It's the latest one under the memes.
Okay, let me think about that.
Do you want me to? Yeah. Will there be more civil unrest caused conflict? Things like the concept of the riots and stuff that were sort of
Yeah
I don't know, looked at.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to think of how to answer it.
I don't.
The problem is,
I don't want to. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think at the moment it's all still very in the planning stages, right? Where you said you wanted to go back and re-look at a lot of these,
because like you figure
systems.
They're good ideas at face value, but they don't interconnect enough. I feel like they're not inoperably just like they're disjointed systems that are good ideas on their own face value, but they need a little bit more like ironing and tightening up per se from a game design standpoint. So when you say that, like we had an idea of having it to where they would riot, and we got the idea from Prototype where like they would express their discomfort with you by having picketing signs and everything else. That never came to fruition. That never kind of materialized. That's something that we need to look at. Basically, even if it's not combative, something that's a feedback loop into how you're playing the game to give you that sense of immersion. That's why Fire in the Air was put into the game. Fire in the Air was put into the game in to basically disperse civilians that were outside of your bases, that were not leaving, that were mad of how you were handling the situation. That's why the beanbag shotgun was added as a secondary to the assaults. So you could switch to it and non-lethally disperse civilians and scare them back. And that would temporarily quell rebellions for a certain degree, but it would still building on the back end. So it's one of those systems that I feel like it just needs a little more time, like a focused effort to just get it over the finish line. And that we have a lot of good ideas, but we need to finish it. We need to, like, when we're doing the Pandemic Light, we need to spend the time to just flesh that system out, to basically properly get the picketing, properly get the non-lethals, and like the active denial, the beanbag shotgun, Fire in the Air, implemented, working, and that they're actually meaningful besides just funny. Because you figure they all affected the civilian reputations in different ways in terms of like the desperation of the situation. And a big a big core of the game is the implications of your actions is everything has consequences. Where you might think it's funny to disperse and kill a bunch of civilians, but eventually it might get to a point where they bring you to your knees because there's more of them than you. So you figure it's one of those things where it's like we need to nail down the points of contention, give them better tools, like what Michael was talking about, is having it to where like we have like civilians with like different types of gun varieties that fill within the role of like more civilian guns, but also having it to where like they have like guns that they raided from like the military, like RPG, so they can actually counter your helicopters and counter your vehicles and via insurgencies. Because the whole point of the dynamic civilian groups is to give another layer of gameplay for what's going to happen if you relegate the civilians to just be stay in your corner, stay out of my way, or I'll kill you. And having that implication of like, okay, like I need to do some kind of interaction. And I think that another thing is once we get to this next pass of finishing up this core stuff and getting the core the core combat loop situated on that co-op map I showed, and then moving on to Pandemic Light, and we can focus on that in like a microcosm or with a microscope per se, to kind of rein in those systems and basically clean them up a little bit per se, to try and get them a little more digestible and easier to interact with. Yeah, because that's been something that's kind of bugged me in terms of basically like we need to. It's such a great system in terms of basically like what we want to do with it, but the execution is not there. And it kind of goes into what we've also been talking about, Winter, when you came in the room a couple of weeks ago, and I was the one that was telling you, I think we need to delete the game and start over. And it was you, it was me, it was Chris, and it was Michael.
Yeah,
and you
I
were
was
like, oh Lord, thank Jesus. You were like, yes, do it right now, delete the whole game. And I was like, what the fuck?
I was like, it's been getting a little bit choppy.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where like that kind of threw us through a wheel. Because we were like, oh, maybe people do want us to go this route of just cleaning the house, sweeping everything up. I know there's been some really like what's the word I'm thinking of? Critical feedback from people on the Steam forums like Ronin and whatnot, where they're always like, you need to fix the core. You need to fix what you already have and stop adding more things. Because when you do that, it makes it a buggy mess. It makes it to where people cannot enjoy and appreciate the game to the extent that they want to. And you paint a bad first present, you paint it in a bad light the first time someone sees the project. And that's something I've taken to mind, where I know he's been really critical on the Steam forums, and I appreciate him for that being critical, because then it kind of gives you a perspective where you're like, okay, like people want more features and more content, but we need the clean house. We need to innovate. We need to finish up the systems that we've already put into the game, kind of deal. And I think that it was a good decision to do the focus of just cleaning up and redoing the project, because then, like we talked about in the room, it would allow us to implement co-op from the get-go, from the inception, and there wouldn't be another trial period. I know there was some criticism for this one too, of like, oh, why don't you guys just do it later? It's like, if we did the co-op later, it would be quicker. Yes, you're correct, to implement everything. But we'd have to go back and retool and reprogram entire sections of the game again to implement co-op. Because there's a different order of operations, different ways that you execute things. Completely different when you're programming a game for multiplayer and when you're programming a game for single player. And we knew we were going to run into that later down the road, and we were going to deal with it. But then, I'm so glad we made this decision. Where it sucks, and I know that it's going to be a little bit longer until you guys can get everything you want. But again, I just ask for the continued patience for basically just kind of, we'll keep you guys informed, and we'll keep basically updating you guys on our progress. We'll give you a transparent look into development of the issues we run into and whatnot, and we'll just keep rolling with the punches. It's like the guy that I was arguing with the Steam forums yesterday, where you're kind of stuck with us. Like, you figure we do our day jobs, we come home, we work on the game, and we just need the time and the honesty from the community as well. Tell us what they like, tell us what they don't like, and give us the time to fix it. So then that way the game can fire on all calibers, and it can be somebody was talking about this on the thing where it's like our general chat where you're like, oh God, please don't finish the game. I'm never going to go outside again. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And I was like, I love that. Or it's like you figure like I get it because like you figure you make games that resonate with you that basically like it's the game that you're not getting right now in the ecosystem of like AAA and indie. I mean, that's why we got Minecraft and all these other beautiful games like No Man's Sky, where it's like those games didn't exist. It was the creators wanted to make something and they executed. So it's one of those things where like I guess it's really great to hear that from people, where it's like your product is starting to take on a life of its own. Yeah.
But, you should tell that Halo guy his antidote. And he was playing our game.
Oh yeah,
he was
the
missing
first time we
tournament.
showed off a game at an event. It was LA, and it was what was the event called? Game? No, it wasn't Gamescom.
Gamescom.
It was oh fuck. It was a really big international event.
Oh, no,
Oh yeah, you have the
it on my
lanyard.
door.
DreamHack LA.
Dream
It was the
Hack,
first time we did it in
DreamHack.
LA, and we showed the game off in 2020. I think it was 2021. And the guy was playing the game that he forgot that he was in an esports tournament, and that his girlfriend had there. No, his girlfriend.
His
Remember?
team had to come over and drag him away.
It was his girlfriend. His
Oh, was it
girlfriend
his
had to come and
girlfriend
be
or
like,
his team?
"You have a tournament in like 5 minutes. What are you doing? You need to come play this tournament." And I think that those moments that are so genuine, that are like literally the best moments you can have. So yeah, fun. Anyway, back to you two.
That's actually honestly that's a we've just a little bit run over on time. That's a really nice place to finish with your beautiful message about how you want to make the game.
God damn, compared to Trump. It feels.
Yeah, crap is,
Okay.
is easier to make.
I was like, God damn.
My thing is, it's good to hear that sort of speech from a developer, because it really generates what's the word I'm looking for? I know what I wanted to say, but my brain is having a malfunction.
Oh, sorry. It's all right.
Yeah.
You'll get there.
But it kind of generates confidence. That's it. It generates confidence because for me, not enough developers come out there and really just speak their mind, and tell it how it is. And it's a
I
vote of
appreciate
confidence.
it.
Really.
The whole team appreciates it when people come on. They tell us what they like and what they don't like, because then we can form a dialogue. And we can figure out like what do they want to see down the pipe. What are we sucking on? What are we doing great on? And then that way it can inform designs. It can inform feedback where it's like, okay, like we get you. So yeah.
Like I will tell from my first experience ever speaking to you guys, you and Michael, for instance, right? I was all
Oh yeah, because you thought we were gonna
speaking
ban
my
you.
mind.
I don't know why.
Now
You had like some fucking
yeah. Now I come in. I come into the Discord and you'll be like, "How's this?"
And then I'm like, okay, hold on, I gotta go cry. No, well, like literally, there was like you got banned from a lot of other indie games because you would show them bugs or whatever. I guess I don't remember what you were telling me. You would show them bugs or reports, and you'd be like playing a stream, and you'd be like, "This is buggy," and then they ban you. And I was like, why would you do that? I didn't understand it. That's crazy to me.
Like, I still remember to this day the conversation I had with you when I managed to I figured out that way back when we first got the operator, we could actually walk under
you
the
streamed it
under
for
the
me,
water.
and I was like, how the fuck did you manage that?
And I streamed it for you. I would go in and I would break everything that I could. I had the head detached from the operator's
no idea how
body.
you
I
did that one
remember that
either.
one.
Yeah.
That one.
Well, I mean, yeah, no, I
Something
dig it.
days.
Well, it's just one of those things where you figure it's just kind of fun, even to get different perspectives of it. Like when you come in, or like I was telling Winter, even like, I don't give a shit. Like as long as you come in and you just tell me what you're thinking and don't sugarcoat it. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. Be respectful. Don't get personal, and just that way we can have a conversation where it's like, hey, like let's shoot the shit kind of deal. While we play a game, even. You know what I mean, kind of deal. So it's like you figure that kind of open culture I feel like is what's benefited the game to get to the point where it is having that ability to embrace the community. And here, civilian evacuation wouldn't exist without that. You know what I mean? Where it was one of those things where that wasn't on my initial docket, and it delayed us by like 3 to 4 months because that was a lot of back and forth. But
you know what?
No,
Maybe that would
but
have
it's
been
one of those things
better.
where like I feel like the game is better for having civilian evacuation because it's how I play the game now. And it kind of feedback looped into basically like how I wanted the interaction between civilians to be, and I didn't really consider it well enough. And then Mana and Terminal and a bunch of other people were like every single day, every couple of weeks, like, you got to do this, you got to try this. And I was like, oh fuck, I'll try it. Fine.
Yeah, it's become such a core part of the gameplay loop. And as I said to you, I think all of those civilian systems need a lot of work to like come back nicely and feel good. But I think the experience gained from having them in you know the way they are and have been will be invaluable.
I still remember to this day joining the Discord and you saying to me, "Oh, this is an idea I wanted to do." This was when you were adding civilians, right? I said to you, the first words out of my mouth about the civilians was, "You know, I'm going to kill them."
Yeah, I remember that conversation.
And it became a thing, and I think that's the funniest part is we went back and forth, you and I. Well, I sat in on a lot of discussions, and you know, I can what I can say is my appreciation for actually being there and seeing, especially that kind of aspect of the game being introduced, and just all came out of that. Like the first time the civilians came a thing, I trapped them and used them as bait.
God damn it! I
Good
cry
times.
myself to sleep every time.
Good times. On that note, I don't like.
Yes.
I think we're all
I
done.
don't think there's
Is there
any more
anything else you wanted
questions.
to
It
cover
seems like
before
people
we
are more
finish
so
up?
shooting the shit. Did you want me to give the outro, or are you gonna do it, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, thank you guys so
it.
much for coming
Go
this
for
week.
it.
We'll have it again next week. Feel free to follow in on our channel on the public Discord to basically daily update blogs, see stuff as we post it daily. We're doing pings every couple of days. If you want to support the team, consider our Patreon, Discord pledges, YouTube pledges. Pick up the book on Steam, pick up the book on Amazon, or get one of the support packs on Steam. They all help out. We really do appreciate you guys coming and sharing your opinion and talking to us. And we will see you guys next week.